Pray. So our Father, our King, we just thank you for this day. Thank you for Shabbat. Thank you for your presence with us. Lord, we thank you that you are a God who created. You are the supreme God. You're above all other gods. So Lord, we just give you thanks. Lord, you're enthroned as King over the cosmos and creation on the seventh day. And Lord, that invitation for us to have covenant relationship with you, what a joy it is, what an honor it is. And so Lord, we invite your Holy Spirit to come lead us and guide us this morning. Be with us, teach us, reveal truth about yourself to us. And we just honor you, we worship you. In Yeshua's name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
All right, cool. Everybody rolled their Torah scrolls to Genesis?
Yes. Literally.
So, like, I normally like to open up. So what are some things that kind of stood out? Genesis 1 to 6, a huge, huge portion. As I've said myself, I didn't get out of Genesis 1. I stayed there, parked there for a long time this whole week. But what are some things that kind of popped out? Maybe we can frame it in the sense of, what does the book of Genesis teach us about God? What's the doctrine of the book of Genesis? Yeah.
Well, he's very creative.
He is.
Very creative.
True.
Very powerful.
Very powerful. Yes. Loves distinctions. We were just talking about the
It still gets me that it's evening and morning or the first day, and when I first read that as a 15, 16-year-old, I was like, oh. And it took me a while to wrap my brain around it, and about 5 years later, the Lord said, you start ordering your day that way, and I'll bless you in a way you didn't know. Start taking a Sabbath, and you will be blessed in your music in a way that you've never known.
Right.
So I mean, that's kind of a transliteration of what he was speaking to me in my spirit, but that's that one concept of evening starting the day.
Yeah.
It still gets me.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
The whole, most of the chapter, the image that comes to my mind is an orchestra conductor.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Yep.
Yeah, I like that.
And building off what he said, he is an orchestra conductor that conducts with then God said. His spoken word is the creativity.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
That's good.
Power of his word. That's right.
I got,
I'm
Go ahead.
I was just thinking about the time component of the 6 days and how, scholars have debated how much time
Right.
is in these few chapters, so
Right.
just think of, overly condensed it into a Cliff Notes version, and it's interesting how much time may have been, or it may just be literal.
Yeah, is a day 24-hour period, or is it a time, season? Yeah.
Right.
All the debates that are out there.
I have a question. This is my mother's Bible, so she has little notes in it. She's got this, it's pointing towards the second verse of chapter 1, and the earth was formless and void. And she has written gap theory. Do you have any idea what that would mean?
So the gap theory, if I understand it correctly, is the division between chapter 1, verse 1 through chapter 2, verse 4. Kind of think of it as like one narrative, and then chapter 2, verse, the beginning of verse, the middle of verse 4 through further on, there's something that happens in between. There's two creation narratives that are happening. I think that's a misconception that there was a pre-Adamic people that kind of, that in the beginning there were some people who lived, they got destroyed, and if I remember it well, I think that's what it means. We'll get into the text because I think that division gap that people say between chapter 1 and 2 actually can be reconciled, because when you look at, you know, the fifth day ends, and then you have the beginning of the sixth day. That's the explanation of, like, the, you know, in chapter 2 verse 4 it says that these are the genealogical records of the heavens and the earth when were created in the time of Adonai Elohim made land and sky. So this kind of shows more narrative, gives you more explanation of what the sixth day looked like. So it's like when people divide these two chapters and say there's two creation narratives, I think, would that be the gap theory in some sense?
I think so.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know much. I know about the two creation, I don't know what it's called, but.
Yeah. So basically, you know, in between chapter 1 and 2, he's talking about there were, the gap theory kind of talks about like these beings that kind of lived until Adam became this representative of all the living beings, the one that represents all of them. But there's a lot of just doing a lot of gymnastics to make that work. So maybe she's kind of saying, hey, I wonder what that is all about.
Yeah.
So, cool. Well, let's begin with chapter 1, verse 1. It starts out with, in the beginning, right?
Mhm.
God created heavens and the earth. The heavens and the earth. Right there, the word God, as you can tell on the Hebrew, is Elohim. It appears when you look at the Hebrew word, God there, Elohim, is plural, right?
Yes.
So we all know that in the Bible, when the Bible uses the term Elohim, it could mean many things. It could mean the Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, it could mean the Godhead, it could mean angels or the divine beings, it could mean the God of Israel. But here, right, like, it's specific. He's using the word Elohim. Created, bara, which that Hebrew word bara is usually connected to God. God is the only one who creates. But created, the verb there is in the singular form. So meaning you can't have plural things kind of creating as singular, because the verb tells you that the creator is single. So we're talking about the God of creation, right? Who is creating not just the heaven, but the heavens and the earth. So let's interact on that a little bit. Any thoughts about that? Any questions?
So, since I don't know much Hebrew, like this much, it's actually Elohim bara.
Mm-hmm.
So that would imply Elohim, even though it's a plural context, the bara being the verb and it's in the singular form would imply that it would be like God, the Godhead, or however you want to explain that. Okay, I just want to make sure that.
And it's really interesting as you see, like, all of Genesis chapter 1, you're talking about God, Elohim, Elohim created, Elohim made, Elohim created. But then in chapter 2, you see the introduction of Adonai Elohim, Adonai Elohim. You'll notice that in verse 4, and it goes on. So that's an interesting observation there, that the Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh is also the one kind of doing the work of creation, because as I've said earlier on in chapter 2, verse 4 on, is talking about the narrative of how God created specifically on day 6. So really something to kind of put into consideration. Now, because Genesis, like, there's a general consensus, obviously, Moses wrote the book of Genesis, right? But we all know that at some point there was some additions, especially in the Babylonian exile. There's some things that have been added and edited in the Bible. So, with that being said, Moses would have been an ancient, right? So we need to understand the genre, the language of the Torah, Torah in the context that they understood in their worldview. So a good example of that would be like the ancient Egyptians. How did they understood creation? The Babylonians had their own understanding of creation. The Egyptians had their own story of creation, the order of creation. The Mesopotamians had understanding of creation, but God gave his revelation, the revelation of his order of creation to Moses based upon his world narrative, right?
Okay.
His world understanding. So sometimes, the reason why I'm saying this is that the book of Genesis was not written to prove science, meaning it was not meant to give us an explicit explanation of how the world was created. It's actually pointing us to the God who actually created.
Mhm.
So the focus is not the intricate details of creation, but the one who created, right? So a lot of times we get in trouble because the scientists have different opinions about, the length and time and how the world was created, the cosmos was created, except Genesis is concerned about who actually created. Even science has now proven that there is a point of origination of creation, right?
Mhm.
Call it the Big Bang Theory, whatever it is, there is a point in where thing just happened. But the Bible is saying before that thing happened, there was a God who made that thing happen, okay?
Mhm.
So we can agree
Yeah.
that God created. Let's interact on that a little bit.
I like that because if you read, I remember this story of this yeshiva, and the rabbi was saying they're beginning, I don't know what it was, but must have been studying Genesis, but he said, essentially read the first part of Genesis, it says, in the beginning, God.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Pause.
Mhm.
And it's like, if you don't believe that, then stop reading.
Right, right, exactly.
Like,
Yeah.
not really, but I'm just saying, like, that's the foundation of everything that comes after it,
Right.
is this, in the beginning
Yeah.
was God. So, I think it's by definition, faith is required. By definition, trust is required. By definition,
Yeah.
it's like, people say, well, I don't believe it, but then they try to interpret it and whatever. It's like, yeah, but you don't believe in the beginning was God. And that's
Right.
a prerequisite
Yeah.
to the rest of the book.
I appreciate your covering that.
Yeah.
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 Well,
It's a lot.
and can I add something?
Please.
And it's also, and this is another Dennis Prager thing that I thought was so fascinating. And just such a good point, going along with what you're saying about looking at this is like, that Moses was an ancient and that, we're not trying to prove science, even though there are, you can draw some parallels and it's really interesting to look at those things, but that's not the purpose of the writing here. But
Yes.
in even in the beginning, God is that many other ancient creation stories begin with the creation of the God,
Right.
or the birth of the
Right,
God, or the way,
right.
like how one God overtakes another God or something like that. Like
Right.
it begins with this like power struggle, and this, in the beginning, God always was. There was no creation of God. God is the
Right.
creator, but he's the uncreated one. And so
Right.
that even is this contrast
Right.
of the God of Israel, this Adonai Elohim that we're reading about, in contrast to other ancient narratives and ancient cultures that are like, their creation stories come from
Right.
battle or some kind of crazy story that's super humanistic in ways, even though
Right.
they're about gods. Like,
Right.
so it's
Exactly.
just,
there's no story of the creation of Elohim.
Right,
Exactly.
right, cause he always was,
In the
and that's just
beginning,
like,
Elohim.
yeah,
Right.
there's
So-
no other God that's like that.
Exactly, and so, like, okay, let me throw this out there, and it's just a comment, side comment, we'll get to it later. So that means every created thing, including, like, the heavenly beings,
Mhm.
was created, God, in the beginning, God created. So when we look at this idea that before anything that was created, there was God, right?
Yeah.
God was in relationship within the Godhead, fully satisfied, he fully enjoyed the relationship he had with the Father, the Son, and the Spirit together. But there is a point in time where he creates his heavenly beings to share his authority to rule the heavenly unseen realm. And then he's creating also the cosmos, and then specifically on the earth, humanity, humans, to give him and share his authority so that they would rule and reign and be image bearers on the earth. So God, from the very beginning, you also have this idea that God who creates also has this desire to share his power and authority so that he shares his power. Like, this is the God we serve. Like the gods of the ancients or the other gods amassed power. It's all about serve me. Like, God says, here is power, I'm giving it to you, steward it.
Right.
Other gods say, no, give me power, serve me, feed me, give me the best of what you have. So from the very beginning in Genesis 1, you see this God who created so that he would share his God space or who he is with his created things.
Wow.
And he actually enjoys it. He says it's good. He says, right?
Yeah, it's like with our own lives, we are given a life, but we can't resist to tinker with it. You know, hey, I think I can make this better. You know, we can make things more interesting here
Right.
and more beautiful. And, you know,
Yeah.
And it's interesting to me that it is a part of our image bearing that
Yeah.
we want to create the same way God creates.
Yeah.
Because he made us like him.
Right.
And yet, that creative desire out of kilter with his design actually destroys more than it creates, which is interesting to me.
Yeah. It's really good. All right, so.
I'm sorry, I
Yeah,
was
go
just
ahead.
thinking, in the passage in John chapter 1, where he says, in the beginning was the Word, and you've got, in the beginning was God, the Word was God, and the Word, and the fact that everything is, and God said,
Yeah.
and God said,
Yes.
and it just emphasizes the Word, and how important the wedding of the two concepts. God is the Word is God.
Yeah.
There's no separation there. So it's like when he speaks, and I feel like I'm hearing him say something, I really need to listen,
Yeah.
really need to obey, really need to.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear you. And another framework that is helpful before we get into the creation accounts or the ordering accounts is when the ancients understood creation, they understood it as a thing coming to have a function or a role or being named. Okay, so this God created, but then like they understood it as like, oh, it actually came into existence and it has a function. And you'll see it also when God names things or Adam names things, right? It has to do with assigning a role and a function. And then the second perspective to look at is they understood it in the context of God making order out of the chaos. Like, so God ordering, separating, kind of making distinction and so like, because you'll see in verse 6 when it talks about in day 2 you have the light, right? Well, we'll get into it. But is God separating? Is God making something visible, and something was already there, but does God make it like seen? Does God make things, the function of it come to life, right? So I think it's helpful to have these two perspectives, God making order out of chaos and God naming things in order to give them a function, was the way to understand creation as well. So in verse 2, you have, now the earth was chaos and waste, and darkness was on the surface of the deep, and the Ruach Elohim was hovering over the surface of the water. And then God said, let there be light, and there was light. God saw that the light was good, so God distinguished the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. So there was evening, and there was morning, one day. So, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, right? The earth was chaos. It was filled with water. It was deep. It was darkness. But the Spirit of God, another thing that we need to pay attention to, the Ruach of Adonai, the Spirit of God was hovering over this creation, this earth, the cosmos. And he was hovering over it. So you have God, his Spirit, and you have the word that is being spoken, right? Like you can see the Godhead kind of, all of them kind of having a functional representation right here in Genesis 1. But then it says that God said, let there be light, and there was light. So is this the light that's coming from the sun? Let's have a little conversation about that. Tom, you can
Sun
jump
wasn't
in on
made
that.
yet.
Right.
Clearly not. Can't be the sun.
Can't be the sun.
Right. It wasn't made yet.
It wasn't made yet.
Well, if the Father and the Son are going to be the light in the eternal city, couldn't it be if they just spoke out of their being, saying that's where the light came from? I mean, they just manifested what was in them?
I personally think that's the case. I think it's the glory and the glory that's emanating from God.
Right.
I think we get in trouble when we try to explain the difference between, day 1 and day 4 by saying, no, the sun and the stars were there. Just God kind of. The reason why I'm saying that is it's good for us to know the different opinions that are out there. Now, Amy
Yeah.
Jill Levine, who is a New Testament scholar. She's Jewish, doesn't know Yeshua, but really helpful things that she says. Her perspective is that it was there, that God created it, except like it was not seen. So God parts some things and it becomes like, but it falls like like, well, if it's not seen, like how does light doesn't just appear. So my view is that the presence of God, the glory of God, the Spirit is hovering over it, and you see it in Revelation 2, right? The illusion that in the city you don't need the sun and the moon to shine because the glory of God is there. I think there's something supernatural that's happening here. And mind you, the waters haven't separated yet either. So you're talking about, this entire cosmos from God's vantage point, and his glory is shining upon it.
Yeah.
Right. And it's interesting that in Revelation 21 and 22, where it talks about there not needing to be a sun or a moon because the glory is there.
Right.
It's talking about the new creation, the new
Right.
heavens and the earth.
Right.
It's the second creation, just like this is talking about the first creation in Genesis 1. So it seems plausible to me that the light that is talked about there is the very same glory.
Right.
That does not require a sun or a moon.
Yeah, I would say it's helpful. We have Revelation 21 and 22, so I think take advantage of fact that we have more revelation in that sense.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
that,
No puns intended.
Yellow puns.
like I was talking about the eighth day, new beginnings, you have 21 and 22 parallel 1 and 2.
Right.
So
Mhm.
this is
Yeah.
like, this is something we need to take an interpretive lens
Yeah.
of understanding.
Yeah,
So
sure.
I don't think it's just we're extrapolating too far here. It's like, no, they actually parallel each other.
Mhm.
And it's pretty obvious. You can go through and name just so many different connections.
Right. Yeah.
So I think that all points to what you're arguing for, which is the glory. And it makes so much sense. We're talking about the uncreated God
Yeah.
who, you know, is in unapproachable light, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
There you go.
So is there a circular thing going on there? I've never seen it before, but in the beginning was the presence, the glory, the light, that we're talking about. And then at the very end of the scriptures, that's the last thing he talks about. So it seems like the whole word of God has now come full circle.
Yeah.
Everything has come full circle. I've never seen that before.
yeah, that's the whole goal, is to get, in that sense, to
Yeah.
a renewed garden.
Renewed.
Or how, actually, back to our original intended mandate and order of this ruling and reigning and making order out of chaos and becoming the family that you always wanted.
Yeah. Rich.
I wonder if there's a differentiation between the heaven where Adonai resides in and where the surface of the deep is, where creation is at. Because when you said that, when you read the scripture, you said that the spirit of the Ruach of Adonai was hovering over the face of the deep. And then when you said, let there be light, I kind of had this thought that maybe that's when the presence
Yeah.
came into the picture, and that was the light. And it kind of ties into what you're saying about the light of Yeshua, and Adonai, and what you're saying too.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like they were on the scene physically, manifested in that.
I mean, look at the passages that talk about the heavens rolled away like a scroll. So
Right.
it's something beyond our imagination, where God's abode, God's presence, where his dwelling place is, like becomes like it's the heaven and earth kind of meet. But then the heaven and earth, we can't just look at it from, Earth's vantage point. It's the heavens, right?
Mhm.
So we're talking about the cosmos, all the created spheres, and then the unseen realm, which is God's domain, sort of meeting. And I even like to use the concept of mission. From God had a mission when he created. He's taking us from creation to new creation, right? Like you had this mission was that God wanted a family, and God has his unseen realm family, and God has his family on earth, and that he wants to join this family together, and he's had this mission, and that his glory would fill the earth like the waters covers the seas. But then we have the fall and the realities that we're in. But mission actually leads to the renewed new heavens and new earth, which is going back to the garden, going back to God's original intent for God to have this family that he gets to dwell with and share life with. So I like that. So I even had this mental picture of like the unseen kind of opening up and the domain of heaven kind of. Lord, help us with holy imagination.
Yes.
Yeah. So verse 6, and God said, let there be an expanse in the midst of the water. Let there be a separating of water from water. So God made the expanse, and it separated the water. It was below the expanse from the water that was over the expanse, and it happened so. God called the expanse sky. So there was evening, and there was morning, a second day. And God said, let the water below the sky be gathered to a place. Let the dry ground appear. And it happened so. And God called dry ground land, and the collection of the water he called seas. And God saw that it was good. So once again, God is now making order out of the chaos, right? Like there's water all over. Now we need space. We need water to be separated. So you pushed part of the water out into the expanse and part of the waters, and you made land and sea, right? Any comments there?
What happened to the water above the expanse?
It's rain
It's a good
clouds.
question.
What?
Rain clouds.
Rain clouds, that's funny.
There is moisture there.
I think the flood had to do something with that. Maybe we'll see that in Genesis 6. But if others have different opinions.
I think we're still, or at least I know I struggle with trying to make it linear or trying to figure it out in a three-dimensional way, where even thinking about how we're not trying to defend God like this is the truth, and we're just trying, or we're learning to understand the truth.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm thinking about science doesn't disprove it, it actually proves God. And quantum physics, which I don't fully get, it's this unexplainable way of explaining God, because somehow he's in all dimensions at once.
Yeah.
And so we're trying to think about him in a three-dimensional realm, and yet he's outside of all realms. And that's how he can be in everything, but then also outside of it at the same time.
Yeah.
And I think that quasi explains it.
Yeah. I forgot who the author is, but I remember reading someone that said that the waters pushed out is beyond the cosmos, and and they say, this person says that the number of stars that you see is also reflections from the water that's sort of encompassing I don't know, I don't know where to stand on that, but
I don't believe it.
I think it's plausible, maybe, but
I still don't quite understand what is actually being referred to here, because is it talking all of a sudden, it's the universe and he's created the universe and then all of a sudden now we got the earth? Or is he talking in a sense where things are getting separated out and made distinct? You got planets, we know there's planets, we know there's suns, we know there's all of that stuff. So but is it singular, is it plural? What is, when it's talking about, the expanse, let it be for separating the water from the water, is he talking water in the literal sense of water, H2O? Is he talking about the general sense of substance as opposed to light? Is he talking about, and are we all of a sudden going from day and night and then all of a sudden now it's the earth? Or is there something that's being inferred here that I don't understand?
I think
Definitely, there's definitely
Nice to know that I don't know everything.
No, I mean, all of us, I'm not saying you, I'm saying.
I think we need to remember that in the context, verse 2 already
Yes.
refers to the earth being there.
Yes.
So I think we need to remember the earth is there.
Yeah.
And the waters are separated in that context.
In that context, and then you see the separation with land and sea.
Yeah.
So I think what was helpful for me is that the first God created the heavens and the earth, is looking at it from God's vantage point, and then now God, he's speaking from the vantage point from the earth looking out.
Okay.
So if that's the case, I think it helped me, because I was like, okay, where's all this happening? What's, in between? Well, God's creating, and his spirit, his glory is surrounding this chaos, right? The earth and the cosmos, and yet there's light. His light is everywhere. But now he's moving towards the earth, and he's separating the waters from, what we see as our galaxies and so there's this separation that's happening, the parting of things, making order out of chaos. But I think who is it? I think Dennis Prager pointed this out, is that like the Lord is coming and speaking from the vantage point of the earth, so that was helpful for me. So if it helps,
That does clarify. I forgot the little detail. It says the heavens and the earth were created, and that's
Right.
in that first day. So
yeah,
thanks.
yeah, you're welcome.
Well, that's if that's not just a narrative at the beginning.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's assuming that then God said is a continuation, which does seem possible based on the Hebrew, the Vayikol Hebrew. What?
Can you expound on that, maybe?
Well, regardless, I guess to me it's kind of like what we were saying earlier, where there's so much in here to know and understand, and yet at the same time there's so much in here we have no idea.
Right.
It's like you kind of have to hold both of those in tension. I think there's this desire to know everything in there and make it all work out.
Mhm.
And that's not really the goal
Yeah.
of what God's trying to tell here, like Emma was suggesting as well. Like
Right.
the Hebrew is more like essence. He's going to give you the essence of it,
Yeah.
not all the specific details of everything. We wouldn't have enough time if you where would you write? It's like where would you write down all the details? It doesn't even make sense, but that's how we treat it. We treat it like a car manual or something.
Yeah.
That's not how it's intended to be read or understood either.
Right.
Sure.
And we struggle with that because
We do.
since day one in school, it's
Yes.
here's the information, regurgitate it, spit it out, and it's like ding, ding, ding. That's not how it's intended.
Yeah, well, I think coming back to, one of Johannes's kind of earlier questions of what does this teach us about God? Like, that's the purpose, is it's revealing something about God
Yeah.
through this narrative. And I think it's interesting of just, because I know we're kind of picking apart, but overarching theme that's happening here is he's creating distinction, right? I was sitting here thinking about it, and I was thinking separation. I'm like, but separation sounds like God is leaving. And that's not what he's doing, clearly.
No, that's not
his
what
presence is still very much there, but he's
Yeah.
creating distinction, and it's in these layers of distinction. And so it's
Deep.
just in the simplest meaning of that, what does that mean? It means that God cares about distinction.
Yeah.
And then even just thinking of we have one chapter about the creation of the entire cosmos, and the rest of the Bible is about his interaction with people.
Right.
So even going back to your original question of what does Genesis reveal about God, and what does that give us about theology? It's God wants to dwell on the earth with people.
Yes.
And at some level, he just wants you to trust the beginning.
Yes.
Right.
Trust the beginning.
I'm not saying we shouldn't study it.
Right.
I'm not against scientists even going through the
Mhm.
Hebrew and everything like that.
Yeah.
But I feel like you need a Hebrew theology degree and be a scientist together to actually work it out. And too many times it's one or the other,
Right.
and they don't have both.
Yeah.
And you really need both to kind of really
Yeah.
sift through this at some sort of.
And the few people who do have both are fascinating.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm not saying it isn't
Yeah.
fascinating, but for
Right.
most of us,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we need to take the essence of it, and it should be
Yeah.
awe and wonder,
Mhm.
Yeah.
whoa,
Mhm.
he did that,
Yeah.
how did he do that? What?
Right.
What?
Right, because it's the demonstration of going back to even the earlier talking about the ancients. It's he just did it with because he's powerful. This is a demonstration of his power, and so you're saying it should
And
evoke
goodness.
this awe and wonder and this goodness
Mhm.
because at the same time remember where are we headed? He's creating this place for people.
Yep.
He's creating this good place for people because he wants to dwell with people in this beautiful, good place.
That's good.
Which is even going back to another, garden to garden reality of like Genesis or Revelation 21:22. What does he want? He wants to be in a good and beautiful place with people.
Yes.
Like
Right.
that's like the unto what kind of
Yeah.
reality that we
Right.
have. But it's like, but he's as he's creating again, like thinking about, which again, we're reading this ancient text, and most of us don't spend a lot of time reading other ancient texts, and so we don't see the contrast.
Yeah.
But it's like other creation stories are still like, and this God is battling this God to be able to do this or control this part of the natural world or whatever. Like it's all at battle and bloodshed and
Yes.
usually promiscuity and all these kinds of like gross things. And God is like, I speak and it happens and nothing fights back against me.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, like, and it's beautiful and it's good and it doesn't have all this other
Right.
Yeah.
That's good.
grossness tied to it. It's just perfect and pure and good
Yeah.
and powerful.
And I feel like the other creation myths are like, I mean, if I'm just real honest, they're a bit silly.
Yeah.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
and weird and,
Yeah.
and strange.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
And you read this, and it's not silly or strange or weird.
Right.
Now, it doesn't all make sense, but it isn't like, what?
Right.
It's like, whoa.
Right.
Like it has a different,
Yeah, it has a
you have
true
you have a different takeaway in your spirit. It's like, whoa.
Mhm.
It's not like, what?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, if you read any other one, it's like, oh wow, that is weird.
Yeah.
So talking about, the focal point going back to God, who is
Yes.
relational, right? I find it really interesting that the contrast and how, Moses writes like the greater light, doesn't even name them, right? Remember, names and functions have meaning. Well, he doesn't name it. He names it later on, like I think it's in Exodus or something. But it said God made two great lights. It just calls them great lights, the moon and the star. And then later on, he also says God created the large sea creatures. So the contrast between sea creatures and not naming the sun and the moon, I think there's something in there. And the idea is that in the ancients, all of these things are what are worshipped, right? They worship the sun god, they worship the moon, or the sea creatures, they actually gave sacrifices to it. Think of Leviathan, this ancient, because remember, like, the sea, the deep, water is chaos, is connected to evil, it's connected to Leviathan who lives in it, who stirs it up, this ancient enemy who is in it. So I think there's something in here that is also embedded in the text where, God is the one who created them, right? Like God created it, and God is above it, and so in the ancient text, you have people who are slaves of the gods, right? Like you have the sun gods or the moon, that they were enslaved to them, but God says, no, God gives dominion to man, and God says, I created these things. God says, I created the deep sea monsters. So the word bara was actually used 3 times in Genesis 1, right? Like first Genesis 1, and then the second one when he created man, and then the third one is used when he created the living creatures, those sea monsters. So he's saying, I am the one who created what is even like considered evil, right? Like, so the unseen realm, like the created things that we see and the unseen things God created. So it's pointing us back to the supremacy of God in creation.
And doesn't even Leviathan serve his purpose? Isn't there, I forget what book it's in, but doesn't he talk about who can, stand up against him?
Yeah.
Job, yeah.
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 And Psalms as
Psalms.
well. I would say that it's like it seems to me from the beginning there's this chaos.
Yes.
And God is inviting us into making order out of chaos.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And
Exactly.
that's part of the creation mandate.
Yes.
So I think you can just see from the more like 30,000 foot perspective, because when you get to, you know, rule over it, subdue it, like
Mhm.
he's inviting us into this partnership
Yes.
of what he
Mhm.
began, if you will,
Yes.
right?
Right.
And so it's like he's from the very beginning, and if you throw in what you're suggesting of that, it seems like the fall isn't like this, I can't believe this happened. I always like to point that out, you know? It's like, no, this darkness
Yeah.
or this chaos, let's just say chaos, which is represented by the sea, by Leviathan, by evil, by Satan, by the serpent, I mean, it has so many things. He's saying, yeah, but that's there from the beginning actually, because I want you to partner with me to step into who I've created you to be.
That's good.
Mm.
And even that is image bearing,
Yeah.
being like God,
Mhm.
because God made us in his image.
Right.
So,
Manifest destiny.
Which is back to what you said earlier, Stan, which is like, there's something in us that you want to make your life better. Nobody wants their life to be worse,
Yeah.
right? And you call it good. It's like nobody wants their life to be badder.
Better. You want it better.
Like there's something
More
where you
chaotic.
always want it to be gooder, right?
Right.
And it was good, and it was good, and it was good image bearing. It's like, no.
it's very good.
And God's the same way, right? He wants everything to be better, but he's realizing the necessity to motivate
Yeah.
us to make it better.
Ooh. I like that.
Mm.
So
That's great.
we see by the end of this portion that instead of as image bearers creating or taking care of the chaos, managing the chaos, man became part of the chaos. And he was affected by it instead of affecting it.
Mhm.
And so it was a reverse of what the intention, as the image bearer, they were supposed to take dominion
Yeah.
and relieve the chaos, organize things, and instead, like we see by chapter 6,
Yeah.
you know, God credit, or he was grieved at this because humankind became part of chaos
Right.
instead of being separated from it.
Right. Yeah, sin and the defilement that entered in brought about curse, right? So
Yeah.
the order of creation of what God said it was good, right? Like the growing of trees and all of that ended up being choked up by thorns and thistles and the hard labor to till the ground and by the sweat of his brow is gonna, right? Like, so there's curse that came upon the land and on humanity,
And even
including
on the
death.
serpent.
Yeah, and then they leaned into it.
And they leaned into it, yeah. And then chapter 4, like murder happens, and so, yeah. So let's go to verse 26. We're running closer to time here. Verse 26. Then God said, "Let us make man, Adam, in our image, after our likeness. Let them rule over the fish." Mind you, there it says them. "Let them rule over the fish in the sea, over the flying creatures of the sky, over the livestock of the whole earth, over the whole crawling creatures that crawl on the land." It says God created humankind. I think the Hebrew there is Ha-Adam, the man. In his image, in the image of God, he created him, male and female, he created them. God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fruitful, multiply, fill the land, and conquer it, rule over the fish in the sea." So you have the original mandate here. Before we get to the mandate, let's look at, right, like the difference between verse 26 and 27, right? Let us make mankind, or does your translation say that? I think there the Hebrew is Adam, and then in verse 27 it's Ha-Adamah, Ha-Adam, the man. But note there that let them rule. So he's talking about let humankind rule there. Mind you, if you look at these two chapters as two creation accounts, we'll have a problem, because like, when does Eve come into the picture? I think my personal opinion is, I think it's very clear that this whole, like the creation of Adam and Eve, happens on day 6 here. And they were given this mandate to, that he blessed them, right? He created them male and female. He didn't put the female attributes in Adam. He created them male and female. He created them. So I'm of the opinion that on day 6, Adam and Eve were created. You guys see that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then God gives them this mandate to be fruitful, to fill the land, to conquer it, to rule it, right? So there's the blessing, the first instance of blessing, being fruitful, and then also land. You'll see that there. And then this mandate to rule. So God creating man in his own image so that he would rule. Let's interact on that a little bit. What does that mean? What's the imago Dei, or what's the image? What does that mean to be image bearers? To be made in the image of God?
Big question.
Yeah.
Well, I used to think that was pretty easily definable, but now the more I am studying Torah and getting more information and understanding, it's almost an infinite number of ways that you can count and how we've been made in his image or like him, or the things that are his intent for us to be and do. Because we're not dealing with just the physical realm here, we're dealing with physical realm with the transference between the two realms, our souls, our mind, our emotions, and then our spirit part. I don't quite, well, anyway, the more I'm hanging around everybody and really delving into this stuff, the more I'm realizing it's not just a specific finite number of ways that we are created to reflect him, to do what he said. I keep finding more and more ways, and the number keeps going up, so I'm not sure that we can actually put it in a box or defined book, maybe 1 million books, but.
And I think it would have to be said that because God by his nature is infinite, he's outside of every dimension that we understand, and even outside of the dimensions we don't understand. That how do we really reflect the infinite in our finite being?
Yeah.
And that's the question I have to ask.
That's that thing with how, that word how with the creation, and it's more like what and why, that
Yeah.
distinction with purpose, and the unto, like Emma
Right.
and Tom, you had said earlier, it's what and why, and the awe of it all, the beauty,
Yeah.
the care. Look what he gave us,
Right.
you know, these oceans and this earth that produces all of these beautiful things, and he wants us to partner with him, that in his image, so that
Right.
all of creation knows when they see us
Yes.
who we are and what our authority and power is.
Yes.
And also, like you were saying earlier, how, so God gave this revelation to Moses in a particular time, and even if it was earlier, it's still like, when you compare this creation story or myth to everyone else, why does God use this word image bearing here? Because especially to Moses and the Israelites coming out of Egypt,
Right.
when they say image,
Yes.
they're thinking of all the other gods, right?
Yes.
All the other gods have images.
Right, oh.
And so when you're saying, no, you are my imagers, you're bearing
Oh,
my
man.
image, it's like screaming to them, like,
That's good.
we're the image of God. All the other gods have their own images, and you're supposed to worship those images. And talk about just, he's flipping the whole thing,
Oh,
right?
that's fantastic.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because you guys remember when we talked about, what are these gods, right? The idols that we were talking about. These were actual figurines and things that they made, but
Right.
they did a ceremony where they invited the spirit of that god to enter the thing. But God doesn't make figurines and put his spirit on it. God makes humanity, and he breathes his spirit in us, right? What that makes us different than all the other animals, right? Like other animals have breaths, but it's not the spirit of God. You'll see that in Genesis 7, where it uses the language, they in the destruction of the flood, it says everything that had breath of the spirit of life in its nostril and everything in the dry line died. So but in Genesis 6, you'll notice, my spirit will not remain with humankind forever, for they are flesh, so their days will be numbered to 120. So you're talking about my spirit versus the life that other animals have. So humanity, God breathed his spirit, the Ruach entered into humanity so that we would be I guess in the flip side of it, God's idols, that we are representatives of God here on the earth, ruling and administering on behalf of God. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I think that's a helpful imagery that.
We just need to make sure we're not worshipped.
Well, go ahead.
That's fine.
I'm not going to
That's
struggle
great.
with that worshiping you. That's
Humanism is the ultimate human worship, right? And so we're in this time
true.
where we don't want to worship God, we're worshiping humans because
Yeah,
we're like
that's
God,
good.
Yeah.
right? So that's the
That's
other
all
extreme.
That's good.
And how to find the happy medium.
And out of all of that comes so much evil that the world sees.
Right.
It's partnering with that chaos rather than partnering
Right.
with God.
Yeah.
Yeah, that in Starship Enterprise.
Oh dear.
I
Yeah.
like the relationship starts right there too. I mean, where it says God blessed them and said to them, he blessed them, we bless him. I mean, there's this interaction, and then we jump to Genesis 12, where we've got Abraham, where, God's and it's my desire to bless you. And so there's this relationship starts there, this two-way. We bless him, his desire is to bless us. I mean, that in that sense, kind of blows my mind that, we sing these songs, we bless you, Lord, and then you're sitting here hearing him say, and it's my desire to bless you. And so that relationship pops up right there.
That's really good. Yeah, that's really
Yeah.
good. And we would be the agents of also blessing the creation that he created as well, right?
As
The mutual
images.
blessing of plant life supporting the animal life, and Adam and Eve given this mandate to rule over the creation and to name them, to name it means to fight for its destiny, to fight for its function. It's and so, right, nowadays we don't think of names as how they did back then. They connected names with its function, with its destiny, with its, so it spoke into its destiny and calling in some sense.
Yeah.
And so that's in partnership with God. Like, God gave Adam this mandate, and Adam got to name the animals.
Can I say one little thing?
Please.
You asked earlier where it says, let us make man in our image,
Yes.
after our likeness.
Yes.
I was thinking contextually right here, he's saying, this is how you're in my image, let them rule.
Mhm.
So it's like, there's one way that you bear my image. And then throughout the rest of the book,
Yeah.
he tells us, do this, do that, and that's how we bear his image.
Yeah.
In all those hundreds of thousands of different ways.
Yeah.
I don't know, because I was thinking, well, that's contextually right here, he says, let them rule,
Yeah.
let them have dominion.
That's good.
So, that's how we show his image right there, just a portion of it.
We don't have time, but let me throw this as an
Overthinking.
appetizer. In Psalm 8, it talks about that he
Yes.
created man a little lower than the angels, right? Or the Elohim
Yeah.
there.
Mhm.
So, a lot of times in Christian theology, this verse has been used to prove the Trinity.
Which verse?
And God said, let us make man in our image, right? It doesn't mean that it can't be the Trinity. It could mean that God is speaking to, within the context of the Godhead. But it could also mean that God is speaking to the divine council as well. Right? So, if that is the case, right? Also, the angelic beings and the divine rulers who are ruling and administrating the unseen realm also they're created in God's image. They're called sons of God in other texts that we don't have time to get into. They're created in God, but God shares his authority, right? So they're administrating the unseen realms. So there's some sense of they're also ruling and reigning in the image of God. They're imagers of God, but ruling and administrating in the unseen. And God is doing the same thing here on the earth, where God is creating humanity in his image to rule and reign and minister here on the earth. There could be some parallel. I don't want to go too much into it because we don't have time, but just as something kind of chew on. So Psalm 8, Psalm 82, those will be good passages to kind of reference there. Let me take you back to chapter 2, right? We talked about chapter 2, verse 4 through this creation account of Adam and Eve there. Sort of belongs together with chapter 1, verse 26, right? So take verse 15, for instance, of chapter 2. It says, then Adonai Elohim took the man and gave him rest in the garden, right? So God made a garden. In the garden, there's the tree of life right in the middle of it. There's all kinds of desirable, good-looking trees that bearing fruits that God made. But in this garden, God puts Adam and gives him rest. The word rest there, is that in the Hebrew, is that nuach there? I think so. In the Garden of Eden, in order to what? To cultivate it and to watch over it. So on top of the creation mandate, you also have this other king-priest responsibility of cultivating and watching. Shamar is the garden to keep. And it's a priestly and it's a kingly responsibility that God gave to Adam, right? And it's actually a command. It says, then Adonai Elohim commanded the man, saying, from all the trees of the garden you're most welcome to eat, but of the of the tree of the knowledge of evil you must not eat. So that command was in the context of guarding within this Garden of Eden that God made. So they were to be fruitful, to multiply, and the Garden of Eden was to expand and fill the earth, right? More population, more children, the family of God was to grow out of this, where, Adam and Eve had Adam had this responsibility of kingly and priestly responsibility of guarding and also cultivating this place that God gave and entrusted. You guys want to interact on that? Any thoughts?
I'd say one thing that just observe here is that like the earth is our intended destiny and inheritance. So this is before sin, and so God's like our part of the creation mandate. Another way to say creation mandate is our intended destiny. So our intended destiny is to rule and reign with God on the earth. And I mean that's what it says here. And he wants us to expand it, like you just said. He wants to expand the garden to the whole earth, which hadn't happened yet.
Right.
But that's the goal.
Yeah.
And so I think it's important for us to see that as humans, as image bearers, where we have His Spirit in us, He breathes that in us, so we already have what we need, like you were saying, we already have what we need to rule and to reign, and like we have it from the beginning, and that ultimately, going now back to Revelation 21:22, like this will happen. Like I just think it's important to like book in that. It's like what God desires, what He mandates, what He created us for. Like not everybody steps into that. I say intended destiny,
Right.
because not everybody will reach their intended destiny, but some of humanity will reach that destiny. Like it does happen still. So I think it's good to see this full circle where, and I'll just say just one more thing, is just that the earth is our inheritance.
Amen. That's good.
That's what's happening here. The earth is our inheritance. The earth is our destiny.
Right.
Yep.
The problem is the earth was chaotic. It was formless. It needed to be conquered, subdued, cultivated, watched over. It needed to be like a garden.
Responsibility is an essential part of ruling. Otherwise, it becomes abuse.
And it speaks into what Johannes, that word you used, administrative, right, when you talked about the heavenlies down to us, and then us administrating over the earth in that function.
Yeah. Responsibility is a good word, because God, with image bearing, we have the responsibility of guarding and protecting and cultivating, which means when the serpent comes, Adam and Eve had that responsibility to guard, but we don't have time to get into it. There's so much in there.
So much.
But I
So
think-
much.
But I think you're helping clarify,
Yeah.
I think you said it, Tom, was, I make all things new, not I make all new things. So there's a lot of bad doctrine in times of
Yep.
the earth is bad,
Yes.
so we need to cleanse it with fire.
Yes.
And even just talk now in public, like people, I hear them say, it's all gonna be judged, it's all gonna burn anyways, and people just think, so just let it burn, and that's, just let it be chaos. And yet, our mandate that we've never lost is to come back to the garden, and we're to start that process now, and not just wait for Him to come back and do it for us, right?
It started a long time ago.
Yeah.
Like we're just entering into the story now. Like, do we
Right.
realize the story that we're entering into?
But I constantly keep getting the Romans 8:19, which is, but all creation groans and waits for the sons of God to be made manifest. And until we understand what we're talking about, how can we manifest?
That's good. That's our manifest destiny in that sense.
Nice.
That's like a different. It reminds me of Mark Twain. His story when he went to Israel in the 1800s, and he described Israel as a barren wasteland. And that's because the Ottomans had ruled Israel for several hundred years at that point. And I remember the first time I went to Israel having that like reality where you'll see places that in the first century were huge fields of wheat and big places of harvest, and now there's just nothing. And then you'd be driving and you would see, oh, the Israelis live here, because then it like would come to life, right? The desert came to life, and they drained the swamps and all this stuff from the pioneers, the Chalutzim, and it's like, no, this is this mandate to cultivate the earth. And you in Israel, you see it like almost nowhere else. Like,
Well, go to Arizona. Go to Arizona. It's incredible.
No,
what
and it's very similar
I was
to
there, and I was like, I couldn't believe these people have
Yeah.
taken the desert, this total wasteland, and you've got crops, you've got palm trees, you've got all this stuff, and I'm like, if this is in Arizona, I can't even imagine. Now I want to go to Israel because to see what they've done with the desert. So it's like we're still doing the mandate, even though we don't
That's
realize
good.
we're doing the mandate. And people, someday the eyes are going to be open. We're going to see, well, we've been doing it in one form or another.
And how much more when we intentionally
Yeah.
do it.
Yeah,
Amen.
yeah.
That's
And
good.
cooperate and agree with
Amen.
God's mandate for
Amen.
us.
Let's go like Ricky.
Chomping, sorry.
So Yeshua, you said king priestly, right? So Yeshua returns us back to that, right? Because he's now, or he's Melchizedek, right? King of righteousness. So at that point, trying to work out how do we accept that authority back prior to the fall? That Yeshua just took us back into that priestly line again. So how do we operate from that authority unto the reconciliation and restoration of all things in partnership with him?
Yeah, I think the covenant, because the Adamic Covenant, right, like the shedding of blood, the covering of their nakedness, right,
Jesus,
starting
yeah.
from there, I wish we could have gotten into that too. From there, like we have, like God then introduces this covenant in language where the new covenant, that now we can begin to maintain this original mandate through the blood and the restoration that happens through the blood of the cross. And we don't have to wait until the new heavens, new earth. We can walk in our intended destinies now.
Right, amen.
Yeah, take
Exactly.
responsibility, like
Yes.
become part of God's restorative work to heal this fractured world, right? So,
And in every sphere of influence we have, we can be that way. We can cooperate with Yeshua in the covenant. We can be intentional to partner with him. Ask him for wisdom, look for guidance, do and trust the leadership he has over our lives to say, in this sphere I will be intentional to partner with the dominion mandate. Whatever that looks like.
Let there be light.
Amen. Let there be light.
it's good. Well,
I have a question.
Yeah, sure.
In verse 15 it says, the Lord took the man and put him in the garden to tend to it. Okay, and then he made man over there in verse 26 of the first chapter to tend to the fish and take dominion over the fish and sea, birds of the air and things like that. Now, how does that, he created male and female. Is there two different type of people?
No, well, that's what I was saying earlier, is that he actually, on day 6, he actually created,
Humans.
yeah, Adam and Eve.
Yeah, but wouldn't it be more than Adam and Eve?
Well, verse 26, he's talking about mankind in general, so with the assumption that they will multiply and they'll be fruitful.
Well, because Cain killed Abel, Cain went to the land of Nod and married somebody. So there had to be more people.
Next year we'll discuss.
That's fine.
There's no doubt that this portion has more questions than answers.
Yeah.
Right,
It does.
right.
Oh, for sure.
Right.
That's for
Way
sure.
more.
I think it's implied. that
First
there's
doesn't
more.
mean only.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was at the end of Deuteronomy, we have one chapter per portion, and then we do 6.
Richie B, would you like to close us off with
Sure.
prayer?
Abba, thank you so much for this time together. Thank you for your Shabbat and the rest that we find in it. It is so good. And we thank you and we praise you that we may be image bearers that bear your light unto your will, your calling. Thank you for everyone that's here today, and thank you for our elders and our leadership, and thank you for the messages that we're going to receive throughout the day. We praise you and we thank you in Yeshua. Amen.
Amen.